Oh,
We're
Test.
good.
Okay.
Yep.
Yep, thank you.
Got it. Thank you.
I'm gonna roll in here a second. You don't need that.
Welcome to tonight's work session, Monday evening, April 24th, 2023, at 6 p.m. We would need a motion to adjourn from executive session.
so moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All of those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Moving on with the agenda. Tonight we have the rental inspection program presented by Chris Schmeezing. We have with us the Planning Commission, the Board of Zoning Appeals, and City Commissioners. We will move forward. Thank you.
Thank you,
Chris?
Mayor. Good evening, Commission. The material I have for you this evening pertains to the rental inspection program that's been proposed, as you referenced. And I've got quite a few slides. I'll be able to go through them fairly quickly, but I'll stop and spend the time on the items that are most pertinent to make sure that we get the information communicated so that everybody can understand what it is that's being proposed. So with that, I'm just going to dive right in. If the commission has a question as I go through the slide deck, please stop me. I'm happy to respond to your questions. So the way I've set the deck up here real quick is just a quick check-in on what the legal basis is for being able to do this, what codes and regulations are already applicable and utilized as we speak today, what are the conditions and challenges that we're trying to address here, and what are the actions that are recommended. So the first item, the legal basis, and I won't spend a ton of time on this. If somebody really wants to take a deep dive into it, I'm sure Frank can spend hours talking about all this. But there's numerous court decisions that have really laid the foundation for the use of zoning, property maintenance, building codes, and the like for the sake of protecting the interest of a community, public health and safety. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time. This one in particular is a case from the United States Court of Appeals, Sixth Circuit, that speaks directly to the legality of having a rental inspection program and being able to do these type of activities. So in Piqua, we've had a zoning code and a number of other codes since the early 1900s. So this is not new. We currently have a building code, the Ohio Building Code and the Residential Code of Ohio for 1, 2, and 3 family dwelling units, which is administered through Miami County Building Regulations through a contractual relationship we have with them. And that covers everything from the building and the structure to electrical, mechanical, plumbing, fire prevention, and other standards that come into play when you're talking about a principal structure. Likewise, in the code, there's a contractor registration, which is really more so for commercial activity as it relates to specialty trades. So contractors, liability insurance, workman's comp, all those things are necessary if a person's working on plumbing, hydronics, electrical, heating and ventilation, air conditioning, and so on and so forth. Again, that's for commercial. And those things have been in existence for quite some time, as has the property maintenance code adopted by the city of Piqua, which is by reference to the International Property Maintenance Code, which is the code that is used by the majority of the communities around the nation who have a property maintenance code. And this is what pertains to existing structures when they fall out of a state of repair, and there's things that need to be addressed that aren't being maintained to a minimum acceptable standard as it relates to the original intent and design and construction of the building product that it's referring to. Zoning more so looks at the uses and the location, the way a site is developed. That too has been in existence, as you saw earlier, since 1930. So those are the codes that we use day to day currently that are relevant to the conversation we're having this evening. But by and large, it's property maintenance code that is really most applicable to the conversation tonight. Before I go to the topic at hand, I want to kind of set the stage and just talk a little bit about some of the conditions and challenges and the reason that we're having this conversation. So in 2007, when we last updated our comprehensive plan, there was an extensive amount of community stakeholder engagement. Citizens participated in a variety of public forums. There were a lot of one-on-one stakeholder discussions with business persons, a lot of research and analysis. And one of the things that was noted in that comprehensive plan is that Piqua has a significant share of single-family housing that has been converted to multifamily rental units. And it goes on to say the combination of that, along with Piqua having a relatively old housing stock, has really impacted the overall quality, value, and image of the city's housing stock. Now, agree or disagree with that statement, that's the statement that was in the comprehensive plan, and that was the finding by the consultant who did the housing market assessment as part of that effort. So how old is our housing? This slide shows you the average or the median age of a home in Piqua is 65 years old. If you look at our neighbors or the national median home age, the national median home age is 41 years. To the north, 49, to the south, 46. So 65 represents a pretty substantial number as it relates to our neighbors and to the national number. If age is a concern when it comes to the quality of your housing product, one has to wonder, well, when were these homes built? And if you start all the way at the right and look at the blue represents Piqua, orange is Troy, gray is Sydney, yellow is the United States in general. You can see in 1939, the early 1900s, we had a lot of growth. We had a lot of housing being built, and there's a substantial number of homes during that era that were constructed. And then each decade thereafter, it's a little less in the 40s, bumped up again in the 50s, still happening in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000. And really after the 08 recession, it really kind of dropped off the legible scale here. So there's, by comparison to the early 1900s, not a lot of housing construction happening in our community. Now, we're not much different than most of the other communities. You can see they're represented there as well. But that leads us to that 65 years median home age in Piqua. So again, if you look at that and just look at Piqua, and you can see, starting with the light blue in the 90s, it's down below 10%, and now it's to a point where it barely is legible on the graph there. So how are those structures occupied? We have in Piqua about 8.6 of the 10,000-ish homes are vacant. 37.5% are rented, and 53.8 are owner-occupied. And this data, all the data that I'm referring to this evening comes from the U.S. Census Bureau 2015 through 2019 5-year estimates. So it's vetted data that is provided through the U.S. Bureau. If you look at the neighbors, which I thought it would be interesting because I hear all the time, Piqua has way too many rentals. Comparatively speaking, if you look at Troy or Piqua or Sydney, it's not true. We're comparable, and in fact, we're a little more than national average, but not way out of skew, if you will. So, thinking about the age of the housing, here you can see, as it relates to home ownership, what does it look like in Piqua as compared to the other areas? And the data here is looking at the U.S. Trend line, and it's showing you it's about 64%. Ohio, it's about 66%. Miami County as a whole, that's all the rural areas and the communities, it's over 70%. In Piqua, the home ownership rate is less than 60%, as we just talked about. Medium home cost, if you look at the value of the structure in terms of, again, if we're thinking about the quality of a product that maybe is by and large older, relatively speaking, if you're looking across the entire spectrum. In the U.S., the average median home cost is $291,000. Now, again, this was 2015 to 19 5-year estimates. I'm sure after the trend we saw last year that these numbers are higher, but it's all relative. So in Pickwood, it's $112,000, and you can see the range there on the other communities. Are we catching up? We've seen some pretty decent appreciation of home values in recent times, but it's not trending at a pace that's going to catch up to the other communities per se. And again, with the increase in valuations last year, I suspect all these numbers are much higher. So, not to belabor the point, so I'm going to skip through a couple of these. So what types of units? When you look at the rental properties, the types of rental properties and how much they're being rented for, I thought this was interesting. And again, I think these numbers are probably low compared to where the market's at today. But the average rent in Pick was $968 according to the 5-year estimate between 15 and 2019. And you can see in our neighbors to the north, 927, to the south, 1,140. In the U.S., $1,680. And that number goes up according to the size of the unit, if you've got a studio or a 1-bedroom, 4-bedroom, so on and so forth. Straight out of the U.S. Census data comes some very interesting and concerning statistics that indicates there's 37 rental units in Pickwood that lack plumbing, 115 rental units in Pickwood that lack a kitchen, 10 rental units in Pickwood that lack a central heating system. Again, this is census data. It's nothing anecdotal. It's statistically valid. And so what are we doing already that relates to this conversation? You've seen these numbers before, and we keep them updated and present them on occasion. We'll try to present them each month as we go forward. But this is the code enforcement activity that we've undertaken since 2016. The total cases, 1,679 cases that have been opened or complaints that have been responded to. Of that, 81% of those have been resolved, so the gutter was fixed or the house was painted, the roof was repaired, whatever the issue may have been. 68 of those were without merit. There wasn't anything there to cite, so they were dismissed. That's 4%. And we've got 246 that are currently open, and that's 15% of the total. When you look at the total open cases of that, 120 of them have just received notice, so there's no outcome produced yet. We'll get there. Unfortunately, 58 of them, 24%, are not responsive. Either they're not communicating or they have acknowledged the violation notice and simply refused to make the repairs necessary. And that's 24% of the open cases, and those are the ones that either the law director has sent a letter and or the letter has went out and it's subsequently been introduced to the courts. And then there's 60 properties that we've currently identified, 24% of those total open cases that are condemned and or are walkaways. There's no active ownership interest that we can communicate with to get the results that are desired. When you break that down and look at the code violations that are issued, roughly 43% of those are owner-occupied properties, and almost 58% are non-owner occupied in terms of where the code violation is going. And again, when you look at the court case activity, which ones are not being dealt with, which ones are, the violation notice goes out, but the outcome is not being attained voluntarily, it's 86% of those are the ones that end up in court are non-owner occupied properties or rental properties. Likewise, on the condemned side, when you look at the properties that are condemned that I referenced, 72% of those are non-owner occupied properties. And just out of curiosity, we looked at it in terms of rental properties, how many are there and what's the makeup, the typology of those properties. So there's 4,350 rental properties. Again, this is based upon using the auditor's data and extrapolating from that the ones that have a tax owner mailing address to the location as opposed to ones that go somewhere else. So that number may fluctuate just a little bit, but it's a reasonably good measure of how many units exist out there. And the higher density units, there's 855, there's 50 mobile home units, there's 255 multifamily units that are in a structure with 10 or more units, 550 multifamily units that have 3 to 9 units in the building, and then units with absentee owners. This one it caught my attention, maybe not so much because of the number, just because of the location, the proximity or the whereabouts of those owners, which is not in and of itself an indication of either good or bad. It's surprising to me that somebody in Alaska would own a house in Piqua. But there's 1,604 absentee ownership instances when it comes to the rental properties of that 4,350. Here's where they're located. Got 94 units are owned by some folks in New Bremen. 4 are owned by folks in Dallas, Texas. You've got 2 owned by someone in Gainesville, Georgia. Again, just interesting data, but it shows the absentee ownership component of what we're talking about when we talk about rental properties. And distance creates more challenges in terms of communication or folks being readily available to be responsive to the concerns that may be in existence at a property, and it's a factor that's worth noting. So here, I could show you 50 slides with pictures like this, but I'll just do 2 or 3 here just to make the point. A lot of times when you're driving by and you're doing the exterior inspection on these properties, it's pretty readily apparent what the issues are on the exterior. Whether it's just garbage and debris and an unkempt property, or something that's been neglected for a long period of time and the paint is peeling and the wood is rotting and things are falling off of the structure, or just lack of general upkeep, missing sections of sidewalks and broken steps and so on and so forth. What's not readily apparent is what's going on the inside of these properties. And occasionally you'll have a tenant who isn't satisfied and wants it to be known what's going on, or the property's a walk away, and we end up with access, or through other means we end up with access. And sadly, not always, but sometimes we discover things like what you see in the photos here. Inappropriately installed heating and cooling systems without the appropriate ventilation or the appropriate ductwork. Units may be placed in spaces, appliances where they shouldn't be, where they're lacking the fire rating separation between the living space and the storage closet that it should be in. Instead, it's sitting in the middle of a room. Plumbing that has leaks and is creating mold and other unsanitary conditions. Unsafe electrical work, which may have had the best of intentions but isn't properly installed, perhaps most likely without a permit. I don't see a green tag there. Sometimes they've covered up points of egress. Windows are not only a way to get fresh air and ventilation into the house, but they're also oftentimes necessary as a means of egress in the event of a fire or other event that requires you to find your way out of the structure. And again, appliances, mechanical systems that are just improperly installed or not maintained as they should be. Sometimes it's just unsafe, unsanitary conditions. Plumbing that's been disturbed and or finishes in the home that aren't being maintained, or smoke alarms that are inactive and obviously not being maintained, shoddy workmanship on electrical, or lack of maintenance of a space and or debris accumulating in a path of egress. All of these things are, each one of them by themselves are a major concern. Together they represent a real life safety issue. So how do we address this? The recommendations that we're putting in front of you are multifaceted. It's not all about rental inspections. Some of it is about stimulating our housing market, attracting new housing stock to our community, new construction, new starts. Excited every time I get an email from Rob Alexander building a new house in Indian Ridge. He likes to report to us that he's brought a new couple or a new family to the community, or whatever the case may be. So we want more of that. And so we know you all have read in the paper, you see it in the national media. There's a lot of interesting dynamics going on in the housing market space right now, but there is, by and large, a lack of new housing. And we need that housing, not only to allow folks in the community the opportunity to move up and move down as they age or their family grows or shrinks, but also to be able to provide rooftops and options for businesses that are trying to relocate someone here or attract new talent here. Or if we're trying to attract a business here, they need to know that there's housing opportunities for their businesses, their would-be employees. And so we want to do the things necessary to stimulate more housing construction. And part of that is being realistic about the market conditions and doing what we need to do to be proactive in terms of supporting those types of activities. So we do a lot in terms of expedited permit reviews. We've got the new units being constructed, finishing the subdivision on the south edge of town, the Arrowhead subdivision, and that's great. There's other land that's very well suited for residential development, fits into the context of the comprehensive plan, and is appropriate for those locations, and we need to find ways to help instigate those activities with those developers. So there's different financing tools that sometimes the locality can authorize, and it has no financial implications on the community other than to support the developer's financing of the project. So TIFs are one way to do that. Another way is to take inventory of where we have opportunities to build homes or housing product on existing sites that meets what the market is interested in. This is an image of the site plan for the Lock 9 townhomes proposed on East Water Street, formerly a used car lot. But if redeveloped with townhomes, it provides a fee simple ownership opportunity with very little grounds to maintain, walkability to downtown amenities, convenience to a trail system, and the lifestyle that folks looking for this type of product might be interested in. So it's something different than the 3 bedrooms in the subdivision with a 1/4 acre of grass to mow, because not everybody is looking for that. So we need to have a diversity of options. Better still, when we utilize existing sites that already have street infrastructure and utility infrastructure, we're capturing the return on investment from those utilities and improvements that are already installed, instead of having that site sit there with a lower use that's not generating the same amenity or, better still, tax revenues for the community. We want to continue to work to establish downtown as a walk-friendly, amenity-rich destination. So if we're talking about attracting businesses to Piqua or supporting the attraction of talent or recruitment of employees for our existing businesses, they are looking for the amenities and quality of life that those employees at those pay rates desire. They want to see a vibrant downtown. They want to know that there are restaurant options. They want to have access to the trail and to the natural amenities that we have in our riverway. They want significant signature gathering spaces such as Lock 9 Park, so that there's a place for them to be entertained and enjoy a lifestyle that they're looking for if they're to locate here and fill that job, whatever it may be. And certainly if we're talking to a prospective business and to attract them to the community, this may not be at the top of the list or the first thing they discuss. They usually want to know, what is your infrastructure capacity? What are the land attributes in terms of what their needs are, and can you satisfy that? And then if you make the cut and they get serious about your community, then they send in their secret Santas, if you will, their secret shoppers, and they listen to what's being discussed at the coffee shop. They go to the Rock Piqua event, or they take a ride on the trail, because they want to understand the quality of life and experience it firsthand and see if it measures up to what their expectations are for what they deem appropriate and necessary for the culture they want to have for their employees if they were to locate here. So these things matter, and they matter more than we may realize. We want to continue to instigate and support reinvestment in established neighborhoods. So if you've got an old rail yard that you can convert into attractive, high-quality workforce housing that represents a significant investment in a neighborhood that hasn't seen investment for quite some time, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. Now, you may need an operator to step up their game and show the riffraff out the door, but These are good things. You want to see things like the old Elks building, more recently the Z's, be renovated and transformed into a space that meets the needs of the next generation, of what the marketplace is looking for in terms of how that space is utilized and how it serves the community. You want to see older industrial buildings that maybe are obsolete by today's design standards and no longer meet the purpose they were originally built for, converted into something that serves the current needs of the community. Maybe it's a gym. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's an old garage that was fine when it was functioning for that purpose, but if it's no longer meeting the standards for the folks that operate those types of uses, how do you repurpose that into something that meets the desires of the community? I should note there, the code PICWA development standards that we just adopted, thank you to the City Commission and thank you to Kirsten French for her work. It is intentional about making it easier to take spaces like this and figure out what the next iteration of their use looks like so that it can be put back into a productive use that contributes positively to the community. All of those things are part of the equation, as is figuring out where these walkaway properties with delinquent back taxes, sometimes $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, $30,000 in arrears, and no viable ownership interest to pursue, how do we get them unstuck? Because no one's maintaining them, and they're falling further and further into a state of blight, which is dragging down or depressing the home values in those neighborhoods. So by initiating programs like the land realization program that we recently established, and creating a conduit for those types of properties to be able to be foreclosed upon and conveyed to the locality so that we then can solicit proposals and get them rehabbed and either sold to somebody fee simple and back at a market value, and now you've got a first-time home buyer or a homeowner, or you've got a rental property that's been restored and it's well maintained. That helps. That helps the fabric of the neighborhood. It helps get the values back to where they need to be. It helps investors who are looking to do more good things in those neighborhoods get the comps that they need to get the financing for the projects they're trying to do. Those are all part of the equation. Proactively enforcing the codes and regulations that we have. I mentioned earlier the codes that we have on the books are there for a reason. We need to use them. When those minimum standards are not being satisfied, then that's not good, because those codes all are there to protect public health and safety. And so if those codes are not being met, then it's having an adverse effect on our community in terms of the community health or the safety of the individuals occupying the structures, or whatever context you want to put that in. So there's a process, and we need to continue to use that process effectively and predictably. And I think we've been doing a relatively good job with this since 2016. We continue to evolve the program and work directly with the law department to deal with the ones that are even more challenging than, say, the 80% that voluntarily comply. The 20% that tend to not get resolved are the ones we really need to figure out how to resolve, and we're doing that. Creating other opportunities by way of the CHIP program, or being creative with other funding sources to provide assistance, working with our lenders to encourage first-time homebuyer programs and things of that variety. Those are all part of the equation to help instigate a means for folks that maybe own a property but don't have the means to make the repairs, to help them be able to do that. And then likewise with programs like Joe Wilson's Neighbors Helping Neighbors program, operations like NeighborLink, which is the same concept. It's an online platform. Joe's doing it on the ground in the community, which is even better. Supporting those kind of programs with our staffing resources and just being cheerleaders, quite frankly, are all part of the equation. So what else should we be doing? And this is the topic of the evening. What has been introduced and what is being proposed is that we establish a rental property registration and inspection program. And the reason being is to ensure that the investor-owned properties are being maintained to the adopted community standards. It's nothing more, nothing less. The second component of that would be to enable periodic inspections by qualified property inspectors so that we can ensure those substandard conditions are being identified and corrected in a timely and appropriate manner. And then lastly, the resulting outcome of that would be that we'd be maintaining a registry of rental properties and be able to demonstrate to prospective renters who are the landlords who are in good standing, who have properties that are of good quality. So what does it look like and how do we do it? We have a draft ordinance. All this information will be posted to the website tomorrow morning. We'll have there with the information and draft ordinance a link to make public comments. We also have some forms in the back of the room. If anyone's interested in leaving a handwritten public comment, please do so this evening. But the way the ordinance is drafted, the way it would work, is that all rental dwelling units would be required to have to be registered, and as an outcome of the registration, the review of the submittal information, be issued a license. So the process would be set up online. We'd make it as simple as possible. You'd submit the basic information about the property location, the owner, the tenants, and then provide a sketch of the floor plan and the fee associated with the license. And then that would be received electronically. All that would be reviewed. If everything at that level passes muster, then the license is issued. The license is valid for a year. And as part of that, then the property is subject to inspection and certification of conditions. And then the last piece that's being proposed here, and I'm going to go into more detail about the inspection process, so bear with me, is that the landlord be a guarantor when utilities are in the tenant's name. We've had instances where landlords had deposits on a property. The individual vacated the property, left town, and it wasn't until after they refunded the deposit that they found out that they had outstanding utility bills that never got paid. And then they were upset because they didn't collect that from the tenant before they left. This is a means or a mechanism to be able to address that, and also a means and a mechanism for the city to not have to carry that cost burden when those utility payments go unpaid by the person's renting the rental property that is owned by the investor who is or should be managing the property. So the registration and license component is, again, as I said, you'd complete a registration application. You could do it online, be easy to submit. You'd submit the required information, the floor plan, the sketch, and the fee. The proposed fee is $65 per unit. That's about $5.40 a month additional rent per unit. And that covers the cost of the inspectors for the program, the vehicles they use, the software they use, and all the other incidentals related to them doing that work. So those fees are captured. That sustains the program. When the program is initially, I'm getting ahead of myself. So the review of the application and material finds that what is submitted, the floor plan is suitable, there's enough living space, there's a kitchen, there's restrooms, everything that you should have for a space to be suitable for occupancy is there. The license is issued on the assumption that the property is well maintained and nothing's wrong with it. And then that license is valid for 1 year, and then that process would repeat each year, so it'd be an annual license. In terms of the inspection and certification process, the owner would receive notification when it's time for the property to be inspected. They would be advised of the date and time. They would be asked to meet the inspector there. They would be asked to be there as the inspector does the work. As part of the program and on the website, as soon as we've got the draft complete, we'll put the checklist right there with some basic information about how the program works. So they'll know, be it the tenant or the owner, what's being inspected. And it's really, at a very high level, it's the basic elements of the property maintenance code. Is there heat? Is there ventilation? Is the place safe? Does the plumbing work? Does the electrical work? All those things. And so the inspection would take place, and within the first, so like 4,350 properties, you can't do them all in 1 year. So the idea is that within the first 3 years, the goal would be that we would be able to inspect every one of the properties, those 4,350 properties. So in the first 3 years of the program, each property has been inspected at least once, in theory. That's the objective. And then if the property is found to have no findings, everything's good, it would be scheduled for a new inspection 3 years later, or if there's a change of ownership or occupancy. So because the property is good, there's nothing wrong with it, no reason to come back. for 3 years. We'll give it 3 years and then we'll check in again. If there are findings, if there's things that are in disrepair or the property obviously has some maintenance concerns, we would obviously do a short-term follow-up once those things are addressed to confirm that they've been satisfied once those issues are identified. And then the record would be noted as the property is now good. It would be scheduled for reinspection in 1 year. Or sooner, if there's outstanding notices, that is, something else came up, we issued a notice, it didn't get resolved, or if there are complaints received about the condition of the property, and those kind of things. So there are a couple triggers there that could to prompt the inspection to happen sooner if it seems as though there's reason to do that. The inspection is through the cooperation of the owner. It's by way of the ordinance saying that the code official has the right to do the inspection. In the instance where someone refuses, there is an administrative search warrant component that's in the ordinance, and that can be utilized. And then lastly, on the landlord being the guarantor, when the utilities are in the tenant's name, that would include the electric, the water, sewer, stormwater, and trash. If there's a late notice, the owner will get a copy of that. If the tenant gets a late notice, the owner's going to get that too. If there's a shut-off notice, the owner's going to get that too. And so that way they know when something is starting to go sideways or there's the possibility of things going unpaid. So rather than have that sit there and accumulate for a period of time, or that person leave town after they get their deposit, and then the owner's stuck with a bill, they'll have a way of knowing that so they can deal with that before it gets to that point. That's the nuts and bolts. That's really the gist of it. There are some things that I think we will further define as we get down into the details, and here's some of the comments, but it's not overly complicated. By design, it's not intended to be complicated. It's not intended to be burdensome for the investors or the property owners. Rather, it's designed to be as simple as we can make it, but still be effective. I would tell you the process that we expect to go through here in terms of adopting this would be first this work session, this information sharing with you all, the City Commission, opening up for a public comment period, which will commence tomorrow and run through May 24th, so a 30-day comment period. After that, the recommendation would be brought to the Planning Commission in a public hearing format on June 13th, and then it would roll into the City Commission agenda on June 20th. I don't believe there's a meeting the first Tuesday in July, so the second reading would be later in July, and then the third reading would be in August. And if the commission's so inclined, the ordinance would be adopted early August, and notifications would go out to the owners of the rental properties that the registration period is open. We believe it would open October 1st, thereabouts. And then they would have till the end of the year to get the property registered. And we would be reviewing that first batch of 4,350 submittals and issuing those licenses. And then in January of 2024, the inspection process would commence. So that's the timeline. That's everything related to what we are doing, what we're trying to do, and what we're recommending we do. So I'll stop there.
I have a question.
Yes.
City-owned properties, will they be attended to before we institute this on the citizens? Because our backyard's got to be clean before we expect them to clean theirs.
I'm glad you asked that. So we actually have sent the code compliance officers around to look at all the city-owned properties, as well as the properties that are owned or controlled by PIC, and taken note of anything that needs to be addressed. And that information has been disseminated to the appropriate department so that they can start taking the actions necessary to remedy those conditions. That's the same as we would do with private-owned property, right? So as soon as we identify it, we let them know, and then there's a course of action to produce the outcome necessary. There's time to do it, and as long as there's communication, we work with them until it's resolved. If we run into an impasse and things aren't getting done, then we need to understand why, and then we figure out how to go forward from there.
Another question I have is that the $65 fee for each unit, is that collected every year or just on the year that they have inspections?
Every year. It's annual. So it's a flat fee. So rather than have a registration fee of a lesser amount and then turn around and charge an inspection fee, just the coordination and trying to collect those two separate fees at various times is inconvenient at best. It makes it easier for the property owner. It's one time, you're done. It also makes it easier in terms of knowing exactly what that amount's going to look like to build it into your rental rates. So instead of having an unanticipated inspection fee any particular year that's out of pocket, it makes it just flat fee across the board once a year.
Has it been discussed to credit the people who own rentals that if they have an inspection and they have no problems, no deficits, that they get a credit of some sort, or?
What we've done, where that number comes from, is through the calculations, looking at how much time will it take an inspector to go drive to that property, do the inspection, generate the paperwork, follow up, those things that are necessary. And how do we make this program so it's solvent, it's sustainable for the city, and we're not subsidizing it. If somebody's in the property investment business, they're for profit, and this is a user fee, no different than a permit. So if somebody needs a permit for an improvement at their property or whatever it may be, they're the user requiring that service, so they're the ones paying that fee. It doesn't make sense for the rest of the community to subsidize it with our general revenues when they're not the ones that are realizing the benefit of the profit earned by being a property investor. So that fee is set at an amount that we think will offset all of the expenses associated with operating the program. So no, we would not be crediting folks for doing the right thing.
I had a question. So I wasn't sure if I saw it correctly. If there's no citations or anything, it was 3 years, right?
Yes.
So if there was a change in tenancy, someone moves out, moves in, will it be subject to another inspection, or?
It can be that there's a few items in there that trigger an opportunity for there to be another inspection. Quite frankly, if you've got 3 inspectors, you're not going to be able to keep up with it. So it really doesn't make sense to run out there if the property has no outstanding violations or any indication of there being a problem or concern. That wouldn't trigger them to go out and do an inspection. But if there's visible evidence of trash and debris or indications that the property is in a state of distress, then that could be an opportunity that, hey, we probably should go take a look at this and see why it looks that way, and identify those issues so that it can be addressed and those things can be abated before it festers and becomes something worse.
So is there measures taken in there where, because a lot of these will already be occupied when they're coming in and doing that inspection, is that correct?
Yes.
So then if someone moves out, is there anything that's halting the landlord from re-renting it? Like would there just, if they do have some outstanding issues that are still to be taken care of, is then that tenant leaves, is there something that's stopping them, or is it just we're working through the coding compliance and making sure that's getting addressed?
So there's nothing stopping them from re-renting it. They simply notify the program so that we can update the records. So if there's a change in occupancy, they submit new information within 2 weeks, I think we said. And then that way we can update the information in the property record. And their license continues and as long as it's valid until the next renewal cycle.
So is there opportunities for people looking to rent these properties that can see that full list of outstanding issues in?
So part of what this will produce is an ability to create a registry that we can post online that shows here's the properties that have a current valid license without any negative marks, if you will, as opposed to here are some that are registered but for whatever reason are currently not licensed because there's issues that haven't been resolved yet. So it could be a very useful tool if you're a renter to be able to look online and see that, hey, this guy owns 6 properties and they're all licensed and in good standing. I'll rent from him. Whereas, hey, this guy's got 6 properties that don't haven't received a license because there's outstanding code violations, I'm going to keep looking, right? So it could be a useful thing to allow for renters to make informed decisions.
Then, so would the only thing that would stop a person from being able to rent that house would be if it's condemned?
Yeah, if the inspector goes out and they find that there's some minor issue that, hey, your window doesn't secure, I don't know what to make up right now, but it doesn't pose a threat to public health or safety, the person occupying the structure. It's not going to be condemned because there's, the house needs painted, or there's a leak in the roof and there's a water stain and the drywall needs to be repaired, and the leak needs to be repaired. That's not going to result in the property being condemned and the owner having the inability to rent the property while those repairs are being made. It's going to result in the notice that says, hey, here's the code concerns that we've identified. These things need to be satisfied. Here's the timeline that we think is reasonable. The owner typically responds and says, hey, I can do that, or I'm going to need a few more days. The code compliance officer makes note in the record and works with them. They respond when the repairs are done. They go out and make the inspection, and they say, all good. Here's the updated license. So it won't preclude the property from being able to be continuously occupied if there's minor issues that are identified when they go out and do the inspection. If there's life safety issues, then there's going to be a discussion about, hey, we need to figure out how to address this. This property may need to be condemned, and these folks shouldn't be living here. So we'll have that conversation, but that's not going to be every property. That's the exception, not the norm, we hope.
And then for the utility portion of it, so how will that be like phased in? Will it only be new renters that are coming in that will have that, where the landlord's the guarantor?
Correct.
Okay, so existing ones, because like if you don't have that structured set up with your tenants and how you're going to handle that, then
I believe so. Yeah, I don't know that we could go retroactively with it, so I think it would be from here forward.
That was
Our discussion with that was that we thought it was a little burdensome to go back to people who are already renting there. There may have been people that have been renting for 15 years, have never had a problem. So we thought about doing this going forward rather than backwards, and so it'd be just new tenants at this point.
okay.
Any other questions? No?
That's all I have.
Thank you for your presentation.
You're welcome.
All right, I believe that we need a motion to adjourn.
So is it going to be open, is this work session open to public comment? Or is it where they can submit public comment and we're having that where you can, there'd be more open discussion during the planning commission?
The public comment forms are in the back of the room at the end of the table. We're going to have it on the website tomorrow, and there'll be an online public comment tool that can be used. Otherwise, this is a work session. Generally, it's information sharing. It's not a forum for comments. I would refer to the chair.
Application form, fill out, check out your tenant before you put it in. Second thing we did, called up contractor.
talk to you about the administrative search warrant check just for a second. You're right, we can't just walk in, but the landlord has the right to give a 24-hour notice of inspection. You know that, that's the law in Ohio, right?
Right?
If the tenant refuses, then the city has the option to get what's called an administrative search warrant. And those are upheld across the country. And it's not the way we want to do it. We'd rather meet with the landlord, go out there and say, hey, let your tenant know we're going to be out here this day so they can get their house in order and everything. It's not a surprise thing. We're not going in there to find something that can put them in jail or anything like that. It's just a simple inspection. As Chris said, you're going to have those items before, we're gonna have a checklist for you to go through anyhow. For example, your wiring has to be up code. You know how that is. There are some people that know how to do wiring and there are some people that don't. Your plumbing has to be up to code. You can't have big holes in your ceiling and things of that nature.
Unless you have a real issue to maintain our properties.
That's,
We need you to go out
I know you may, but it's not true across the city.
and go after the one who didn't do it, but don't penalize the rest of us. That's what I'm saying. You got people out here that work hard, bought properties that were run down and beat up, went in and renovated, fixed them up so they were livable, to provide housing for the lower income people and the middle income people that are working in their little jobs right now for minimum wages that are serving you in the restaurants, need a place to live. And so if you take away their rights, everybody don't make $80,000 a year or $100 an hour or whatever you might think. They don't have pensions and all that. They have illnesses, they have families, and it's rough. It's really, I've rented to Section 8 housing. I've had some of my best renters on Section 8. I've had bills.
We don't have a problem with Section 8 housing, but this is less than one Starbucks coffee a month, Chuck. This is less than one Starbucks coffee a month, one pack of cigarettes. That's what the cost would be if you were to pass it on to your tenants.
$1 there, pretty soon you got 500.
I mean,
You guys all make it sound so cheap, like the renter just sitting out here, oh, I got an extra $20 to give you this month on the rent because the city needs the money. That's what it's all about. It's always been that. It's not if you're so concerned about health, and safety, why are we having a football team? Well, those kids can get hurt out there on the field. You should stop that. Come on, you can't protect everybody. They're responsible for their own actions. We're not their fathers, we're not their caretakers, we provide them a place to live. And we're not allowed to intrude in their lifestyle, we're not allowed to enter their houses illegally. Proper notice, if we have a reason, you can't just go up and say, I'm gonna come in and look at your house. We have to have some reason to do it. And that's their right to privacy. So I don't understand why we've had this problem all these years, and it's still as bad as it was. So the problem is, your neighbors up there, you got out-of-town owners, that's one of your biggest problems. We can't control that. And I don't have a problem, if you want to move into my property, that's fine. We're not responsible for their utilities and stuff when they move out. If we got a deposit, we try to help, but that deposit don't even cover our expenses when they tear up. You guys all think we're sitting here rolling all this money. By the time you pay your taxes, your insurance, your maintenance, your city regulations, your storm waters and all the other stuff that you throw on, you're lucky if you can break even. And if you got a mortgage, you probably won't make it. So you can't go in here and put $10,000 in a property because you think it needs to be pretty. It needs to be usable and feasible. Pretty has nothing to do with it. It has to be functional. That's what safety is. I plug something in, it's safe.
that's our goal,
Water is
is
safe.
to make it functional.
Huh?
Our goal is to make these places functional, Chuck.
If you want to make a white picket fence city, what you want.
I certainly don't have a problem with improving,
You can do that.
I don't have a problem with seeing improvement in the city and having people paint their houses and having, there's nothing wrong with that. And I don't see why anybody would have a problem. It's going to improve the value of your property.
I don't either. I don't have a problem.
Okay.
I've worked in precincts with renters, so I talk to people at the point.
Yeah.
It belongs to your neighbors. You have a responsibility to keep the property so the neighbors don't have to put up the bed and stuff. Because there's not going to be a white picket fence house like the neighbor's house might be. They don't keep their yard back without a weed and stuff. And that's just part of it.
Mr. Starrett, your time is up.
Pardon?
Thank you. Your time is up. Thank you.
Time's up? Okay, well,
Thank you.
Mr. Smeezing, could you repeat the process that is being proposed for implementation, and then also repeat the process for people commenting on the proposed legislation? Excuse me.
Sure. So the process is that we'd have the public hearing or the work session this evening. That would be the beginning of a 30-day comment period. The comment period, there'll be an online tool on the website that'll have the information about the program, the draft ordinance. A person can use the link there, make a public comment. We've got some printed copies in the back of the room here if a person wants to handwrite a public comment or take it with them and bring it back, drop it off at our office at a later date within that 30-day period. And then after the 30 days, we would receive those comments, bring a recommendation to the Planning Commission on June 13th, and then they would make a recommendation to the City Commission, and it would be on the City Commission agenda June 20th, and then proceed from there. On that timeline, it would be in effect, or notices would go out to rental property owners that by October 1st, we would have open the application process, and they would begin to submit the application materials to begin registering the properties so that we can issue the first batch of licenses. And then at the 1st of January 2024 is when the inspection process would begin. Again, at least 3 years to get around to all the properties the first time. And then you come back 3
Will
years
the-
later.
Thank you.
Will the public notices or the public comments be posted so people can see them or not?
Yeah, that shouldn't be a problem.
Post them?
Would they be anonymous or have the option to note that?
Yeah, we can give them the option to be
We'll
anonymous.
create a checkbox that they can let us know if they don't want them to be displayed.
It's afraid we won't get the feedback that we'd want to see.
Right, ordinarily, we
Yeah.
would let them be anonymous for that reason, but certainly we can share them with commission.
And people have the option to come to the planning commission meetings and have public comment there. The city commission meetings, have public comment there as well,
Yes, sir.
and input and
Yes, sir.
dialogue.
Yep. That's the way the process works.
Are we adjourned?
I would move for adjournment of the meeting.
Second?
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned.